Welcome to Hidden Conversations. Hidden Conversations is coordinated by WVIK and hosted by Dr. LaDrina Wilson, a leadership and diversity expert. These conversations are designed to delve into many of the most difficult topics of race and equity facing the Quad Cities today. Many of these issues we hear about every day on the news, but we are often left unaware when they occur to our own friends and neighbors. We hope that by hearing firsthand stories and statistics from experts based right here in the Quad Cities, we can break down the myth that these issues only happen in other places, and in so doing, increase our empathy for those who literally live right next door. Thank you for joining us this evening. And now, here's Dr. LaDrina Wilson.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Hidden Conversations. I am so excited about tonight's show. I'm going to show my bias in telling you all that I have been looking forward to this conversation for the last several weeks. We've got a phenomenal group of people who are going to be joining us, but I think my bias is not just for the panelists, but also, I work as an educator in my daytime job. My mother was a 35 plus year teacher and administrator here in the community. My husband has been a teacher and an administrator here in the community. And quite frankly, education has been a value from the time that I was just a little girl. So I think in this environment where we are dealing with COVID, I think that the first debt of gratitude that we owe is to our frontline workers who are in the medical profession and who are really making sure that our community is safe and well. But a close second is to our teachers who are rolling up their sleeves and trying to figure this out for our kiddos. They are online sometimes, they are face-to-face sometimes. And so I just really appreciate the fact that we're creating space for our educators and for those students who are in the education system for us to have these types of conversations. And now more than ever, I think it's critically important that we talk about education. We're going to do this from the perspective of, having a critical lens, but also working towards identifying solutions. And I think education is one of those spaces where oftentimes everybody's got an opinion. And I really feel like it has a lot to do with the fact that we've all gone through compulsory education. So we think we know because we sat in the seat. We know what it was like when we were in school. And I would say that education is one of the few, or if possibly only, professions where all of us have had to go through it. So I ask you to sit back, enjoy the conversation, come in with an open mind. I think we're probably all a little bit more open-minded now than we would have been pre-COVID. And I'd like to bring in our guests who will be joining us for this conversation today. We have got Dr. Lauren Hammond-Ford, who's a history professor at Augustana. We've got Dr. Reginald Lawrence, who is the superintendent for Rock Island School District. And we have Mr. Chase Mason, who is a graduating senior and homecoming king for Bettendorf High School. So congratulations on that. Thank you all so much for making time to chat with me today. You are all the resident experts for your particular area and perspective. And so I'm excited to find out where things overlap and also where maybe you guys see things differently. When we talked leading up to this conversation, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of representation. That's been an undertone, a common thread across the various conversations that we've had as part of this series. But I think it really hit home for me in terms of representations for Black professionals in education. And the reason it hit home for me is I didn't realize until I never even questioned it. I think I was, my sophomore or maybe my junior year of college before I had my first Black teacher. And it didn't even occur to me. And I don't think I was at a deficit. I had my mom and she was definitely in my ear. So she probably was my first Black teacher. But it occurred to me that the difference that it can make as I began to study education. And so I wanted to talk with you all about how you chose to pursue education as a career. And can you tell us a little bit about what got you there and if there were any specific experiences that you had that led you to become an educator? And I will start with you, Lauren, because you're at the top of my screen.
Sure. So first, I just want to thank you for having me before I jump into answering the question. And I would say that probably one of the things that pushed me to become an educator actually happened in undergraduate. As I got into my field of study and area of specialization, I noticed that there were very few professors of color, let alone African American or Black American women who were on staff and were faculty at the undergraduate institution that I went to. And that left me feeling a lack. And so one of the reasons, there were many, but one of the large reasons that I chose to go into higher education specifically was so that I would have the opportunity to provide that mentorship, that guidance as a woman of color that I felt like I was lacking when I was an undergraduate.
And your experience, going through college and seeing that, it sounds very similar to even mine. And I imagine we're close in age range. So, but I think that there's something to be said. I did my doctoral research in diversity in understanding of diversity in higher ed as it relates to the professorate. And today, 87% of the college professorate is white. So it's not changed drastically from 20 years ago or 15 years ago or so when I was in college. And so there's something there as far as I'm concerned. Now, Dr. Lawrence, I don't know your entire background. I assume you spent some time in the classroom, but my husband is also a Black male teacher, and you guys are like unicorns. so tell me a little bit about how you ended up in education.
Right. Well, actually, that wasn't my first love. My first love was broadcasting, because during my time, Bryant Gumbel, he's probably way before a lot of people speaking, but Bryant Gumbel was an astute, well-dressed, well-spoken face of the Today Show. And so I wanted to be the next Bryant Gumbel, but then realized that there was only one of them at that time. And so in college, in undergrad, I happened to go to the library and I took one of those interest surveys. You answer 500 to 1,000 questions about everything in your life. And mine came up with 4 things that said I was going to be. Said I was either going to be a broadcaster, a journalist, an aerospace engineer, because I love math. And can you guess what the 4th one was? Said I was going to be a teacher. And started taking education classes and realized that in all of my classes, because my college was predominantly white, but in all of my college classes, I was the unicorn. I was the resident expert anytime there was anything about race. And I just felt that, that was almost my duty. I'm doing it through my classes. And once I got that first teaching job, 4th grade with those students, I just knew that I was going to be an educator for life. So changed my life. Wow. I'm here now, 30 years later, still in education. Wow.
It's hard for me to like picture you in a 4th grade classroom.
That's my joint. That's where I'm at. I'm telling you, dealing with those 4th graders who they're a little bit older than kindergarten, 1st graders, yet they're not quite middle school. So they have minds of their own, but really they will, if you treat them right, they will follow you to the end of the earth. And I love 4th grade,
Awesome. Wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing. Well, Chase, I know you haven't gotten quite there yet. I think you told me you're pursuing possibly accounting. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what I'm going to be pursuing at St. Ambrose University next year. But kind of to piggyback off what you said, I've actually never had a Black teacher before in my life. So I think that just kind of shows that the representation isn't really there for African-American educators. And actually, I've had I think it was my associate principal in 7th and 8th grade was African-American. So, I mean, she's a very nice lady, Miss Sandato. But besides that, I mean, there's definitely a lack of Black educators, not just in our area, but overall in the world, or not the world, but like the United States. So I definitely can, I think if that's an avenue, if I ever take a survey, the way that Dr. Lawrence does, and I come to it turns out that they recommend I be a teacher, I think it'd be a big avenue I'd be willing and pursuing for sure.
Yeah, I think, when you reference that and then you look at, how long it's been since I was a senior in high school, and then we're still at that same point, right? If you've had or none. And so that really drives home the point that that is not changing over time. And there's something to be said about that. I had the opportunity, I don't know, it must have been in 2018, Reverend Ford here in the area through it, he hosts a conference, a critical mass conference, and it's where he brings in leaders nationally and internationally known. And one of them was Dr. Virgil Wood. He was I guess you would say he was on the front line with Dr. King. So he marched with Dr. King and espoused a lot of the same beliefs. And he was one of the speakers at that particular conference back in 2018. And one of the things that he remarked that really stuck with me is his reflecting on the civil rights movement and the impact of desegregation. And so, Lauren, you might be able to speak to some of this, but from a historical perspective, there was actually substantially more representation of Black educators pre-desegregation. And so Dr. Virgil Wood, he basically stated that he felt that was one of the biggest missteps that they made is working toward desegregation too soon in our K-12 system. And that kind of threw me off because, when you hear about segregation, that's it's not one of our proud moments in history. So Lauren, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or.
Yeah, I think I would say that overall, I agree. I'm always one of those people who, while recognizing the benefits of desegregation is also always cognizant of the losses. And I think that having Black schools with Black educators who could teach primarily Black curriculum is something that we're really missing. And I think when it came to desegregation, what tended to happen was that Black children were integrated into white schools as opposed to kind of having an equal exchange. And so essentially what happened, at least in my opinion, is that many of those Black educators found themselves no longer viable for a series of reasons. And whether that was because school districts had concerns about training, just thinking about, African-American normal schools that trained educators and, even to a degree, those types of institutions have gone away. And so, while desegregation, definitely had its benefits, it had its losses too, I think even just within a Black business community, thinking outside of education. So, yeah.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the Black teachers and being trained professionals. You also talked a little bit about, that interaction with those students and the curriculum, right? So could you share from your perspective, I'll start with you, Dr. Lawrence. Do you feel our current curriculum delivered in our schools adequately incorporates the experiences of both current experiences, but also more from a historical perspective of different ethnic groups, specifically Blacks? Oh, I think we might be having you muted. It's not you, I think.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yep, we can.
All right. Great. Now, I was going to say that right now, while some of the curriculum that we use, it's research-based, and it checks all the boxes of being cultural and talking about race, more from the past than from the current history. So it's because it's research-based and because it spans a whole large amount of area and time, it really doesn't dig deep and give us what we need as far as not only for African Americans, but for a number of other ethnicities. The curriculum tends to always go back to what's happened in history. And I know that for our current students, the millennials, that's tough for them because they want to know what happened from 1980 on up, and even the 80s is old. And right now, not a lot of our curriculum does that.
Hold on now. Did you say the 80s were old?
I said the 80s based on here we are in 2020. So if you do the math, I don't even know if our resident expert Chase was around in 1980. But so case in point, he'd probably say that, wow, 1980 is kind of old. But right now, like I said, our current curriculum that we're trying to use it to give our students some history, some knowledge of where they came from, and and how we got to where we're at. But I don't think that it does a good enough job of merging the past and the present, because the present is what happened this summer with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all the peaceful protests and everything that took place. And I don't know if we have any curriculum that's that current. It'll be coming out soon, but right now we just don't have enough curriculum that merges the two together. It'll give you a little bit of everything, but you can always benefit from having and taking a deeper dive into a particular race or ethnicity or a particular time in history.
Chase, from your perspective, you're a current student. You're on the receiving end as opposed to the planning end of what curriculum looks like. What's your response to that?
I'd probably piggyback off Dr. Lawrence. I would agree that the curriculum, it's more based on the past. I mean, obviously that's what history classes are for, is to learn about our history. But I know from my perspective, when I was in little freshman Chase in ninth grade history, I felt like all we talked about was slavery ended with the 13th Amendment, and then just jump forward to 1964 with the Civil Rights Movement. And, they never talked about how, and there's a clause in the 13th Amendment that says, except for criminals, nobody else can be slaves. So, they don't talk about how, masses of people were being arrested for petty crimes and stuff like that. They don't ever talk about stuff like that. And I do agree, or one of my beliefs is that, history, it's about reflecting on it. So, we don't really want to shed light, but we also have to learn from our mistakes if we want to move forward. And kind of jumping forward to that, we in schools and stuff, we should be talking about, what happened over the summer, what happened to George Floyd, why do people feel this way? And also being willing to have that open conversation in most classes. So I think that there's definitely some improvements that can be made, but, I think with everything that we got going on in the world, I think there's definitely multiple ways to learn about it. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Lauren, I'll ask you to kind of chime in, because it seems to me that when we get to college is where we start having more of these critical conversations. And Chase is evidence that students have a thirst for this type of critical dialogue at a much earlier age than what our K-12 system is willing to give it to them. And Chase, you're right. There are different methods of getting the information, and there's some personal accountability in how you go about finding facts and learning history, right? But our school systems are really relied on heavily for this type of thing. So Lauren, why do you think it is that it takes a student to get to college, if they make it to college, to learn about this aspect of history?
Well, I think to piggyback on some of the things that Dr. Lawrence and Chase have said, by and large, this is not something that is a required portion of our curriculum. And so I was doing some research, and Illinois has recently passed a law that requires there to be a unit on Black history that is taught. But in terms of what exactly the content of that unit is, how long, the duration, and the method of instruction, that's something that's left up to the individual school districts. That's where I think we can get a little bit dicey and a little bit dangerous, because if you don't know the content or the method of instruction, then that leaves room for, a week-long unit where everybody gets to write a book report on Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, which, as Chase has said, we tend to say, well, slavery was over, and now let's skip to, the 1950s and 1960s and thinking about the civil rights movement. So I think I would say, the short answer is no, that we don't have enough of that representation. I do want to mention very briefly, I saw that Connecticut has recently just passed a law, I want to say within the last few days, that now is making Black and Latino history a required course, or at least required for them to offer it within the school system. For the first few years, they imagine that it will be an elective, but their hope is that they will gain enough momentum so that it's a requirement for all of their students. And so that's kind of the direction that I would like to see both Illinois and Iowa move into. And so I see this show up in the college classroom all the time. I'm trained as a Latin American historian, but I teach the African diaspora in the US and Latin America. And so when I teach the intro to Africana studies and ask students what they know about the Black experience, what they know about slavery, what they know about Martin Luther King, civil rights, they never really know anything, right? And so being at Augustana, the majority of students that I get are students who come from the Illinois public school education system. And so to me, that shows that once students get to higher ed, it's maybe because there may be a diversity requirement that they have to take. And that's going to be the only reason why they have an opportunity to learn about this vital part of American history. And I think that's the key thing, right? It's not just, Black history, right? No, African Americans are a vital part of the entire American story. And so I think when you don't have a sense of that, that can be what leads to people feeling confused about why African Americans are upset about George Floyd. It's like, well, that's not police have been killing African Americans in this country for centuries, right? And so we need to be able to contextualize things like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor within this longer history of police violence against Black bodies.
Yeah. Thank you. I think, there's the story that comes to mind when you guys talk about, representation and understanding of, I'm going to use a diversity, a more broad term, but in the context of racial diversity, I can remember, so I have 4 children. My oldest is 16. She was in preschool. And as I share these stories, and as you all are sharing your stories, we understand that we are a community. This is the Quad Cities community. So what happens in Davenport matters as much as what happens in Bettendorf. And anything that could happen in East Moline is the same thing could happen in Rock Island or and vice versa. So understand when I share this isn't about one particular school district. It's about our Quad Cities community. I can remember her coming home, and she's in preschool, so she's 4, and she kept talking about Abby. All I heard about was Abby. So this is her new friend. That's probably like her first friend. And so a couple weeks went by, her talking about Abby, and this is what she and Abby did at school. And then it turned into, I want to wear my hair down like Abby. So for anybody who knows Black hair, our hair grows out, not down. It goes out, goes this way, not that way. So So she wants to wear her hair down. And so she's basically asking me to straighten her hair. And she's 4 with this little Afro puff, and still not a big deal, but I understood because I remember that feeling, right? Then she said, I want Abby to come over. I want Abby to come over. I want her to come over and spend the night, or I want to go spend the night over at Abby's house. And so that went on for another couple of days. And then she came home and she said, Mom, Abby said I can't spend the night over at her house because her mom and dad said I can't spend the night because I'm Black. And she said, I don't know why Abby keeps calling me Black when my skin is brown. So there was, so my 4-year-old, who didn't know she was Black yet, was introduced to being Black through the lens of Abby's white experience or her parents' experience, right? And so I'm sharing this story for a reason. Just follow me for a moment. I realized a couple of things. One, I had to help my daughter. I wasn't having the conversation about race yet because I didn't know that it was time, right? I knew it was coming, but she's 4, right? First child, didn't make that mistake later. But what I realized is my reaction was, okay, I need to educate my daughter. We already have all these different books and diversity represented in the books that she has at home and in her toys and that type of thing. But I went to the school. And I met with the director of that preschool, and I said, what do you guys do? What do you have in your curriculum regarding diversity? Because my concern was not for Maya Naya, who was 4. My concern was for Abby, who was being taught hate at the age of 4. And so the teacher, the director, was almost like flabbergasted that I asked that question. And I started paying closer attention when I would pick up Anaya from school. There was no dolls that were represented. There were no toys that were representative of other cultures or races or ethnicities. There were no books that were on the shelves that were written by Black authors or had Black illustrations or other cultures. And so when I hear you talk about mandated, there's still some concerns with mandate. It's a step forward, right? But it's really about helping educators understand that I think our students have a thirst for a quality, diverse, rich experience as it relates to culture being integrated into their education. So
Yeah, if I can kind of go off what you were saying,
Yeah.
I remember my parents having that race conversation with me. It was right after the Trayvon Martin the murder. And I remember I'd watch the TV and I'd see all these protests and I'd be like, Mom, like, why are these people protesting? And I would say I was a pretty educated third grader. I mean, I was only 8, but I still think that, I definitely understood a lot of kind of what was going on. And they had to tell me that, this isn't right. And, they kind of sat me down like, this isn't right what happened, but this is what happens in all the time. And I kind of understood. It took me a while to kind of put that in perspective, but I mean, I think I had another black student, so it was only the two of us in my third grade class, and it stayed like that all the way up until middle school. And I had more, when middle school gets more diverse with all 5 of the elementary schools, or 6 at the time. But I definitely think that just because you mandate something doesn't mean that it's gonna be taught that way. For example, I remember my sophomore year, we read Huckleberry Finn, where it says the N-word over 200 times. And my English teacher, who I'd consider, probably one of my favorite teachers, she wouldn't say the word, but she'd say ninja instead. And I still kind of took offense to it because she didn't go into detail about why that word was offensive. And she didn't go about like why we shouldn't say these words all the time. And the same people who I'd argue about that, or not argue about, but like tell them about how I feel about this, they're the same people who are like, oh, it's our, like we created the word, or, like it's not that big of a deal. Like we understand, but they're the same people who go out and, they say it and they're like, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. But I'm like, it means a lot to me. That's part of my history. That's part of my culture. And I felt like when we sit there and read over the word, or she just skips it and doesn't talk about why this is important or how it relates in some sense, that it doesn't cover my culture. It doesn't show how we're starting to evolve and move somewhere. It feels like we're kind of staying stagnant. We're staying lateral. We're not moving anywhere when stuff like that happens. So I think like what you said, mandates are a step forward, but it depends on how you mandate it. So me and my club, a few other colleagues at my school, we started a club called Black Voices Matter Leadership Council. And we all agreed that, these words, they hurt, when they don't talk about it. Cause I mean, I don't mind when they say the word, but they understand like this is wrong. This is why we don't say this word anymore. But when they don't, and they don't explain why, and they just kind of go past it and move on, that's when, it kind of gets lost in. So instead of reading Huckleberry Finn, or I think the book is To Kill a Mockingbird, that's a freshman book. I didn't get to read it because it's different units, but instead of doing that, we're going to read what's the book called? I can't remember what it's called. The Hate U Give. That's the book. And the reason why that's important is because the book's more relevant. The main character, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the main character is a teenage girl growing up in our society today, instead of the To Kill a Mockingbird being taken back in the 50s and 60s. It's something more relevant so students can understand that, this is just a book, but it relates to what's going on, because, the book talks about police brutality, and we had the George Floyd incidents, going on. And it helps build context of what it's like to be in the shoes of an African-American going up today, being a black person, especially around my age. So I think
So
forward, but I agree with you.
Chase, who picked that book?
Who picked that book? I'm not sure. I know my principal was talking to me about it. She said that that's the book they're going to read, and I'm not sure what year they're going to implement it, but it's going to be in the future. So after I leave, but I just know that was a book that I recommended. We all recommended as a group, because it relates to us. It's a student that's our age that talks about it, so right. It helps context and stuff.
So one thing I did want to mention, so I think having these laws that are mandated are important. But I'm one of those people, right? I'm a historian, right? So I know that just because you have a law, if you don't have a means of enforcing it, then having the law doesn't matter, right? And so if you notice, one of the things I talked about was also the question of content and training, right? So it's great if you have a mandated unit, but the question is, well, what's the content? What books are you reading, right? What textbook do you have? Have the teachers been giving proper training in terms of how to actually teach that material? Maybe how to teach Huckleberry Finn and talk about the use of the N-word, right? And so that's one of the questions that I always have when we see these things that are mandated, right? Which is, again, a question of, well, do teachers actually have proper training to be able to talk through these very difficult and challenging texts? And then also, who is picking the material that you're going to be looking at? If we think about standard history textbooks, they're just like you said, Chase. Well, there was slavery. Well, that was really bad. And then Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks was tired. And so that's why she would get up off the bus, right? But the thing is, if you have someone who is qualified, right? So that's maybe one of the solutions. I know we'll talk about solutions later. But when it comes to parents, and this is not just African Americans, but all parents who care about diversity in education, what's the summer reading list? What does the textbook look like? How many units do they have? Or, in what ways do they talk about Black and Brown history, right? And if you're not seeing those things in the content and you feel as if there's no training there, then that's where you need to take the issue to the school board, and you need to say, we need to revise the curriculum, and we also need to make sure that these teachers are trained, right? And I've looked at some of the licensing requirements for the state of Illinois. They're very loose in terms of what standard material you have to go through in order to be able to understand and teach about the experiences of people of color. So those are other things that need to be changed. And maybe if we're thinking about solutions, parents, you got to be aware, open your kids' textbooks and see what is in there.
And if I could piggyback on that piece, I was just going to say, even before the actual training and that whole bit, because definitely the professional development is important. But, just in our day and age, we get back to talking about, cultural competence. You can even mandate the training. You can even say alongside of here are the materials and that whole bit. Once a teacher gets to close their door and they start teaching, people tend to go back to their strengths. I was a math teacher. I had a whole bunch of papers written up and marked red in English class. But when we got to my portion of teaching, in my fourth grade classroom, I might have glossed over some of the English components just a little bit, but when I got to math, I hit it hard. And I'd say the same thing, goes on with our teachers of today. We talk about the cultural competence component of it, and you talk about biases and how, again, those hidden biases come out in everything you do or say. You may not even know that. And so, alongside of the whole content area, really have to take a deeper dive and get into, bias and just getting to know about other ethnicities, other diverse cultures, and trying to get to the point of acceptance and respect for others, understanding of others. So, everything we just talked about right now, there's so many components on just being ready to teach the right content that's going to get to our students. It's the reason why, and I know we get back to talking about achievement gaps and others, but it's almost like playing golf. And I tried it. I played 9 holes one time. I haven't went back because in order to hit that ball, you got to hold the club a certain way. You got to make the perfect triangle. Your feet have to be a certain way. You have to look the ball through. You have to swing back so far. You have to follow through. When I grab the football and play, I just grab the ball and I'm gone. That's too much to play golf. So I haven't gotten into that yet. Well, right now, that's the same thing with the educational piece and moving forward. There's so many pieces to just get to the point of getting to the curriculum and getting it to our students that we sometimes get stirred away.
Did you know that I'm a golfer? Did you know that I golf?
No, I didn't. So you may have to give me some lessons after this. I've got a set of clubs I've used one time.
You weren't attacking me.
So we had a question that came in during that conversation, and I think it's probably more of a rhetorical question, or maybe it feels that way for me because I feel like the answer is obvious. The question is, who's writing these textbooks? And, from my research, and Lauren, you probably can shed some light on this too, we know who produces the majority of the textbooks. They're written from a white male perspective. And and published from a white male publishers or companies that are owned by them. And so what I would just say is, while that perspective is one perspective, it is not the only perspective. And because it has been so disproportionately represented, you find these same types of history being told in a certain way and been accepted, because much like Dr. Lawrence's comments were, doing this work around racial diversity, racial equity, having conversations with people who are different from you it's not always comfortable. So people do go back to where they're comfortable. And I often use the analogy in diversity work is, you don't have to be the expert. Well, teachers, when you get in front of the classroom, you're the one that they're looking to you for all the answers. So you don't want to look like you don't know. That's an uncomfortable space for you. But I think if we can get students to be able to have a voice, I know Chase has participated in board meetings and he's got his club and he works with his principal. If we can get students to help educators understand how important it is to be culturally relevant, to be, and I feel like our teachers could better understand it coming from them, because they're not being teachers for the money. It's because they care. They care about making a difference with our students. And I think sometimes we've lost that perspective. And, I know our teachers have a lot of pressure. It's pacing guides and Common Core and, all these requirements that they have to follow. But there's still some creativity that could be incorporated into fulfilling those guidelines and making adjustments on what books constitute the curriculum, right? You can still learn using a different source. It doesn't have to be a To Kill a Mockingbird. Chase and I shouldn't be reading the same material 20 years later. We could, but it should be one of many options, right? Tale of Two Cities, or whatever the case may be. There's some core books that we go to that historically are written by white males. And so, I really appreciate the robust dialogue around this. And I think it's really important for me just to underscore our students have a thirst. And I think we have a commitment as a community to really rally behind these teachers who do want to teach a little bit out of the box, but may be afraid because they feel like they may have to come up against something when they do that. Lauren, to your point, you said people question, well, why do you have to have a Black history class, or why do you have to have a Latinx course? Well, it's because our information hasn't been integrated. So now it ends up being a standalone. But for some people, when you call it out and you make it a standalone, they perceive that as people being divisive and not really wanting to work together. And it's like, it's not about that, right? So thanks so much. We're going to shift gears just a little bit, because I think it's really important that we spend some time talking not just about the achievement gap, but also kind of the opportunity gap. We're in this very digital age where you're getting compliments on your sports coat, Dr. Lawrence. We're in this digital age. And so I think it's really important that we bring up some of these issues before we hop into some of that solution-oriented space. I'm going to share a little bit of data with you guys right now. One of our school districts recently applied for some state funding and grant funding related to internet access, given the fact that many of our students are now in a remote environment. About 22% of African-American homes lack a home computer. About African-Americans and Latinx families are substantially less likely to have internet access at home. About 17% of high school students who are Black will not graduate, compared to about 9% of their white counterparts. And less than 50%, so 43% of our third grade Black students are at proficient reading level. So when we talk about achievement gaps, it's one thing to see where things are not panning out in the long haul, whether that's completion and then attainment in college and transition in college. But I really like to think about it from an opportunity perspective. We know that poverty disproportionately impacts the Black community here and more broadly. And so it creates these gaps where there's less opportunity. And I want people to understand that there's so much talent in our young folks and in our Black community. But when you have to focus on your resources and you are in survival mode, you don't always get to tap into those things that are your natural gifts and talents. So with that, I just want to reach out to you all to get your perspective on, and I think I'll start with you, Dr. Lawrence. What do you attribute to the achievement gap or some of the opportunity gaps that face Black students?
Well, I mean, again, when you say opportunity, it means having the opportunity. I think of when our students aren't given the opportunity to participate in AP classes or IB classes, when they're not given the opportunity to be a part of specific CTE classes that may be offered, where they're dual credit or what have you. I think it one kind of goes back to efficacy. Sometimes our kids aren't given the opportunity because we don't have an adult that believes our students can do the work. Our students can have the success. That's an efficacy piece. There's some people that have the belief that you're born smart. Whereas there are a number of us who weren't born smart. We had to work twice as hard to learn and to move forward. So for me, it definitely gets back to the efficacy piece and the belief in our students of color, Black and brown, and also having the opportunities. You know, when I look at opportunities and I talk about it from a school district standpoint, when funds come to us federally and when we spread them throughout our schools, when we get a lump sum of funds based on our student numbers, we do the being equal thing. We spread the money up and we make sure every school gets a portion of what is there. When we should be looking at which schools need the most, let's put the majority of those funds using equity and getting those funds to the most needed schools, the most needed areas. And in society, we can't visually see that as being fair. And so I think it gets back to one, efficacy and that whole belief. And then two, just providing the opportunities and being intentional with those opportunities. In my own experiences, like I said, growing up and going through kindergarten through 12th grade, when I look at those years, I didn't grow up in a home with a silver spoon, but I had a mom and a dad who they knew that education was important. And so when it meant going off to kindergarten, I was one of those kids reading in kindergarten. Why? Because my parents knew that I needed to learn number and letter recognition. I needed to be having opportunities to read and talk and converse before going into school, because otherwise I was going to be deemed as being behind when I came in. And it was based on those opportunities. And so I think that, and that'll be a solution. The more opportunities early on that we can give all students, including students of color, access and opportunity, we're more resilient than anyone. We're going to grab it and we're going to run away with it. So it's efficacy and then opportunities.
So I really want to make sure, sorry, I was having some issues with unmuting, but I really want to make sure that people heard what I heard. I heard efficacy and opportunity, but I also heard what's fair isn't always what's equitable. And so I think when we get to this space, when people are so worried about what's fair, I always hear, well, why am I not getting it? Or what am I not getting, right? If you're getting it, I should get it. Well, if my house is on fire and your house isn't, I don't want the fire department to show up and water both of our houses. When you look at graduation gaps and you look at reading proficiency gaps, give the resources, give that water hose to who needs it. And we all do better, right? Chase, I want to hear from you. What do you think, what do you attribute some of the achievement gaps to?
Kind of agreeing with Dr. Lawrence. I definitely agree that, and kind of what you said is the opportunities and making sure that all, not just, Black kids, but Latino kids, other minorities, make sure they have the resources that they need to develop. My parents, they cared very much about educating me. I was never very fond of reading, so I didn't really read that much. But, when we go to Chicago, instead of going to, maybe going to a Cubs game or maybe going to do something fun, let's go to the Field Museum. Let's educate me based on that. And just giving me a whole different perspective on just life. And that's something I've been blessed with. But for those kids whose parents, maybe they're not there, maybe they can't afford to do that. Well, then it's the school district's job to say, well, how can we help those students? What resources can we give them so they benefit just as much as the kids who deserve it the most, or not deserve it the most, but who are getting it at the time. So I definitely can attribute it to that. But also it's kind of making sure that these students have somebody they can look up to in school, I've never been perfect in school, but I know that my teachers, I knew that they would always kind of look out for me whenever I needed it. So it's kind of, finding people who are willing to help out these students in schools and stuff. And I think that that's big, and making sure that they have somebody to look out for them and that they're going in the right direction instead of, they grew up this way, they live in a bad neighborhood where, drugs and crime are a problem. Well, let's see, how can we make sure that they're not getting involved in that crowd and stuff like that. And that's not just Bettendorf. That's not just, Bettendorf, the Davenport schools. That's all over the place, It's not just those kind of opportunities, but, kids at, Pleasant Valley, kids at Assumption. We need to make sure that, they're getting the same opportunities all over the place. And I think that's kind of what Dr. Lawrence was shedding on, is making sure that maybe not stuff's equal, but everybody's having a fair share and is getting their opportunity to do something big. I definitely think that's a big thing.
So with the comments that you've made, Chase, in terms of opportunities, and Dr. Lawrence, you as well, when you don't see those opportunities earlier, we get some of the data, right, that I've shared with you But Lauren, can you talk to us a little bit about what that translates to in the world of higher ed and what you see in the classroom as a result of some of these things?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the biggest problems that I have seen throughout my time as an educator and having been at different institutions, and most of my girlfriends are also college professors, and most of them are women of color. Having the opportunity to talk with them, one of the things that we see particularly is a struggle for students of color when it comes to STEM fields. And so oftentimes, because there's that lack or that dearth there, students may come to campus excited about being pre-med or some other kind of pre-health, but by the time they finish their first year, they've dropped out of that particular program. And I think that a lot of that has to do with issues in terms of inequities in K-12 education. And I think that there are a number of ways that we can be addressing those things, but I think a lot of it has to do with being aware of the narrative, but also knowing your child's story, or once you get to the college level, knowing your own story, what your own desires are, what your own goals are, and then making sure that, as a parent, you figure out ways to supplement or get help, right? Or, once you get to college, right? If you know that this is something that you really want to do, and you also know that there are historic issues when it comes to students of color in STEM fields, then go to the school and say, we need some kind of program, right? So when I was an undergraduate, we had a bridge program for students who were interested in engineering, where those students who were primarily students of color and students from low-income neighborhoods, they came to school 6 weeks before the rest of us started as college freshmen, and they got help that they needed in order to ensure that when their engineering classes started, they were on pace and they could do the work. And so again, I think you have to know, yes, that there's this narrative about, a lack of success or achievement gaps, but then know who it is that you are, who your child is, and then make sure that you're doing the things that you can do to fill those gaps, to make sure that that narrative doesn't become your narrative.
You have an excellent point. And you've nicely kind of transitioned us into solutions, right? And so for me, I watched my husband and my mother work in the K-12 system. I spent like 2 years in K-12. We don't talk about that. That's why I'm in higher ed now. But I don't like the fourth graders like Dr. Lawrence. But what I watched how much pressure is put on our educators to be a part of the solution. And then unfortunately, when you're one of few, meaning a Black educator, there's this enormous amount of pressure, right, to try to like save all these little babies that need this help. And you become that role model or that example for them. So one of the things I wanted to ask of Chase and also Dr. Lawrence, because Lauren, you kind of alluded to it. Chase, I want to know from you, what do you think students need to do to overcome some of this overwhelming data that suggests that it's a little bit harder, it's a little bit of a different road for Black students to achieve some of the same things as their white counterparts. So what suggestions do you have for students?
I know definitely. It's about educating. It's educating like basically what I'd say the ignorant, even though it's not really ignorant, but educating those who aren't educated. I know a lot of people. Before I started my group BVM, I talked to a lot of my friends who are the same color as me, and they're I told them I think this is a big idea, and I think that we should do something. Like nothing's going to change. It's that fixed mindset. It's not that growing mindset. And it's being optimistic instead of pessimistic. That's the thinking you have to put into it if you want to get out of this. It's that thinking that I'm right here, but I want to be here. And that's something I kind of attribute to it is I kind of like grew up not only looking at my dad, but also Barack Obama, who was president for most of my childhood is, I did a lot of research about his story, and he grew up, poor little kid who grew up in Hawaii and then Kenya and then Chicago. He didn't have a whole lot of money growing up, but he was driven. He had the thinking that I can get out of this. And, he ended up becoming the first African-American president of the United States, and I think that's the thing that has to go into not just for students, but also for educators. When you see a Black kid who's in your class and they get it, well, why haven't they turned in their assignments on time? or something like that. Instead of just saying they're a bad student, maybe going to that mindset of, let me talk to their counselor. Let me see what their home situation's like. It's kind of being educated as students, but also with educators as well, is trying to fix the problem both ways so that we can get somewhere when we need to be. Definitely, I think that's probably one of the starting things.
Thank you so much. That is so encouraging to hear young people talking about having a growth mindset. Don't ever lose that spirit, Chase. Yes, Tracy. Yes. I feel so much hope, when you hear students like him, and I'm reminded that, Dr. King was 26 years old when he led the the Montgomery bus boycott. And Chase, I'm not putting any pressure on you or anything like that. I'm not trying to call you Dr. King, but that's only like 8 years from now. Okay.
That's a lot of pressure you're putting on me right there. That's a lot of pressure.
All I'm saying is, it starts with this type of mentality, and it starts now. And so what I am saying, all kidding aside, is if you can bring people along with you on your journey to this self-determination, to finding this growth mindset, you have no idea, you have no limits. So I'm trying to encourage you, not pressure you, but thank you.
I appreciate it.
I asked Chase to talk to me about what students need to do. And he said, okay, I'm gonna tell you about that. And I'm gonna tell you about these teachers. This is what they need to do too. So Dr. Lawrence, from your perspective, if you could shed some light on what you think maybe parents could do to overcome some of those data points that I shared.
Well, first I have to say, Chase, doesn't this sound, listen to this. Dr. Chase Mason. Man, doesn't that sound good?
I like it.
Absolutely. So you have to, I put it in the air. I know there are 2 or 3 more people that's going to throw it in the air. So that's going to come to fruition. You are definitely, like I said, I'm excited to see our young experts who have this growth mindset. So that definitely means that the glass is not half empty. That's awesome. For me, in looking at what I think parents need to do, and I hope no one takes it the wrong way, but sometimes we can get complacent, we can settle, we can get used to how things have been, and sometimes that deters us from taking that extra step. I feel that parents have to realize that they are the first teachers. They are the first teachers. They are the everyday teachers, the all the time teachers. We have to remove that mindset that, and I used to hear it a lot, where when you go to school, that's the teacher's job, is to just educate you. All the education doesn't happen in the classroom. So for me, I say that our parents have to, they have to continue to be engaged in their students' learning. They have to not settle. I would say that they have to continue asking questions. I know that is hard. I know that, I have to work these certain hours, and I know that, I may not have, the technology and the things that are needed to move forward and help my child have as much success as possible. But to me, it's really about not settling and continuing to be as proactive as possible. It means that, again, when my child doesn't have what they need, technology based, or they're having problems and issues at home, or with their education, the curriculum, being proactive in contacting the school. And I know that's stepping out of our comfort zones. We talk a lot about homeschool communication. Schools are definitely, they may not communicate as much with homes, because oftentimes you would get calls when it's negative, when you didn't do something, when you didn't turn something in. So I'm saying that my parents have to continue to be proactive in keeping those lines of communication open, whether it's asking for something, whether it's getting clarity on what it is that their child needs, or even getting more information on what it's going to take for their child to overcome and become whatever they can, whatever they want to be. So it really gets back to continuing to do that work. There's a phrase with, it's not just with African Americans, but it's a mindset with a lot of individuals, is that we feel we have to work twice as hard to get to where we need to be. And I truly believe that. I'm going to say that there's nothing wrong or bad with that. Absolutely. We know if everything were equal and fair, we all would have to do the same things to get to the same place. But if you want better for yourself, you want better for your child and our children, we can't be complacent. We can't settle. We have to be the ones to, we have to be proactive. And that's what I would want for my parents, is continue to be proactive. And it doesn't mean it has to be a whole lot of hard work. When my daughter was 3 and 4 and we were in the grocery store, you know, one of the biggest things to learn, when you grab a pomegranate and a kid asks you what it is, and you say, Kayla, this is a pomegranate. We go home, we spell it out, we cut it open, we see those little red seeds in the middle, and you squeeze them and get juice all over yourself. But that's teaching. And we have to take it down to that simplest form. So being proactive in the lives of our children. It can't stop once they get to Chase's age and they're intelligent and well-spoken like he is. Chase isn't there. I hope that he never gets there. He's still going to need assistance moving forward. And we as parents, we have to do that until our kids are 35 like me.
I just want to join in really I just wanted to join in really quickly and just note that don't be intimidated when you're a parent. I think that sometimes that may be the other thing. When you're concerned about your child, you may feel like, oh, well, the principal or oh, this so that they're the expert. But you're the expert in your child, right? What your child can do, maybe where they have some challenges and where they need to do some growth. But again, don't be afraid, right, to go to the school board if you need to, if you see that there's an issue with your child's education.
Yeah, I think, Lauren, you make a really good point. And Dr. Lawrence, as you were talking, it occurred to me that typically at the beginning of each school year, I email my kids' teachers because I want to introduce my student to you. I don't want any bias or stigma or anything that may be lurking that you may not even be aware of. I want you to know not only who my child is, their strengths and their weaknesses, but I also want you to know they have a mama that cares. So you have to care too. Because when you don't, you're going to get a different type of email, right? So you have to show that you're engaged early. And I didn't do that this year because of COVID. I'm blaming COVID. Everything was like thrown off. But I do think that is one of the strategies that you owe to your child, is using those moments, that pomegranate, and saying, instead of saying, put that down, quit touching stuff, use that as that opportunity to teach your baby. And if you don't know what it is, use that as an opportunity to show them the importance of lifelong learning and learn it together. The other thing I was going to just point out is, sorry, Lauren, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I heard Dr. Lawrence say 35, and I'm like, I thought he said he was good at math.
Oh, I'm 5'2", you know, 35, 53, when you mix those numbers around, you know, I asked God to be 6'5", but he made me 5'6".
I'm the same way. I wanted to be 6'5" too, but I'm pushing 5'7", so.
So the funny part is we're doing this and I can hear my mom laughing in the other room. So I do want to take one question. We've had a number of questions that have come in over the last couple of minutes. I'm going to take one question. I apologize. I'll try to catch two of them, you know, real quick, just because we have just a few minutes left together. But there was one question about post-COVID. What do we want our schools to look like in a post-COVID environment? Post-pandemic environments. Let's not return to the same system. Are our districts having some conversations? So I'm going to direct that one to you, Dr. Lawrence, if that's okay.
Yes, I mean, we want them to look like when we would say a teacher was forward thinking if they were doing online instruction pre-COVID. You only had a few teachers who used technology. They gave their students homework. They contacted them using Google Classroom. That was looked at being forward thinking. For me, we don't want to go back to the old normal, because the old normal didn't work for a lot of students. That's why we have achievement gaps and all those things. So we want the new schools to be 21st century, have access to technology, internet. Everybody should have internet. It's like electricity and water. Everyone should have access to internet. They should have access to technology. Class should not just go on within 8 to 3. We have some students who, you know, high school students, they don't get up till 1 if they have the opportunity. So education needs to move to being 24 hours a day, meaning that you can learn your schedules. I want to see adjustments in schedules. Some of our students learn later on in the afternoon. You know, I think that the new paradigm is going to be that education and learning all the time, 24-hour learning. That's what I want to see happen. And I don't want us to have any excuses of not having the tools or the curriculum or, transportation to get to where we need to go. All those things should be given and afforded. Take the excuses off the table.
Thank you so much for that. There was one other question about white allyship. I don't know if we could get that posted on the screen here. So I think I'll take a minute to kind of touch on this. Or maybe Lauren, do you have some initial thoughts on what you'd like to see?
Well, I think, some of the things that I've already mentioned, and I'll just say that briefly. If you are, a white parent or a white student who sees yourself as an ally and as someone who cares about diversity issues, you can be doing the same thing, right? Don't let Black and brown students and Black and brown parents be the only voices out there fighting for change. So if you're a white parent and you care about diversity, look at your kid's textbook. And if your textbook is not showing something that's diverse, that's an issue you need to take to the school board. If you see, projects that are maybe being created in schools, my sisters, when they were kids, they were like, well, pick who you would have been in 1850. And it's like, well, as a Black person, I probably would have been a slave, right? So you want to be able to be aware of those kinds of things. And if you're hearing of those things or you're seeing those types of things, then be a voice, be a voice.
The only thing I would add to that is charity starts at home. So while you may want to be a support to kids in the school system, your child is going to that school system every day. And your child may sit next to Chase and need to be a champion for Chase. And your child may be in a position where they hear things that are inappropriate and teaching them how to be a bystander. So as much as you want to have impact with those educators and, the school board and going directly to teachers are certainly routes that you can pursue. But boy, teaching what it means to be respectful and conscious, choosing to be conscious about racial injustices and inequities is super important to do within your home. And you have no idea what type of impact that will have on your own child and then how their tentacles get out into their building. So with that, I thank you all for giving us your time and your expertise. I'm so glad that our community got to meet the young Dr. King. Dr. Mason.
Oh boy. Big shoes to fill.
I also am glad that the community got to meet the 35-year-old Dr. Lawrence. And also thank you so much, Dr. Hammond-Ford, for joining us in this journey. We're going to continue to have these conversations once a month up until March. And so please, if you have any questions, I will be going back in later on tonight. Lauren, Chase, and Dr. Lawrence, you're welcome to go back on Facebook Live and address some of the comments that have come in. We've got more comments on this episode than any of the other ones, so I'm super excited about that. Thank you again for your time, and I look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this evening for Hidden Conversations. The Hidden Conversations project is coordinated by WVIK and organized by Tracy White, Dr. LaDrina Wilson, and myself, Jared Johnson. We have also been advised by Dr. Lauren Hammond-Ford, Ryan Sadler, and WVIK's Intelligent Conversations Planning Committee. This series of Hidden Conversations is scheduled to culminate with WVIK's Intelligent Conversations event on March 11th, featuring former NPR host and current Washington Post contributor Michelle Norris, where she will discuss her books, The Grace of Silence, and the forthcoming book, The Race Card Project. We hope you are able to join us for all of these important and meaningful conversations.